He laughed quietly, shaded laughter that Emily recognized from the humor of alleys, a derision born of horrors. She wondered why he laughed like that, and she found out. A lot of people who've been loyal to Malvolio, he said, aren't giving up easy. I heard stories from my barber. A shipping clerk in Black Ridge walked into a gun battle on his landing dock at 6 o'clock in the morning over something in the back of a truck. You hear what I'm saying? Then yuppies almost wrecked their speedboat on the lake. He rose both hands as though this, as Emily knew, was obvious. It was midnight. It was gunfire between a private plane and some trawler chugging north by Fredonia. He grinned subtly. The worst was kids in Bowmansville watching a manhunt in Ellicott Creek. The kids bet on the guys running away. He leaned back and laughed. They were dressed better. Richard stopped talking and laid his dark hands flat down where the waitress leaned her thigh on the edge of the table, chewing gum. Not very interested, the waitress asked, "What can I get you folks?" "I'd like apple pie a la mode," said Richard, eyebrows rising in expectation, "and coffee with cream." "A la mode, eh?" asked the waitress. "Is that vanilla a la mode?" Emily saw the waitress wink at Richard and couldn't tell if the wink was camaraderie or brazen racism. "Vanilla is perfect," Richard said with a slow grin, and Emily was touched by his composure. Emily ordered a big iced tea with tuna fish sandwich on wheat, and when the waitress returned her pencil to her purplish hair and dabbed a set of studs in her ear, Emily was touched again. This woman had to be 50 years old, discouraged and tired. Her studs were crazy on a woman her age, but she made sure her jewelry looked right. When she started to leave, Emily gently took her wrist in her hand. "What?" the waitress asked, a tad defensive, but mainly bored. Emily understood. She didn't know the waitress' name, but she knew the lady. This old babe would have plugged along for years and probably had a broken house, empty now of broken children, a broken heart, and burning feet for her pains. Who could have appeared in their midst at their perfect moment, except her? Emily chuckled. "Look at us. You know what we're talking about?" she asked. The waitress frowned as she would at a deacon in church who wanted her last dollar. Cracking gum, the waitress reiterated without much interest. "What?" "We're talking about jobs," Richard told her, lifting his chin and smiling. "We're talking about races working together." He wrinkled his nose as if he had told a joke. That crazy waitress, she asked the question that completed the context. "Working together," the waitress asked. "For what?" "Exactly," Richard murmured. "We think we can make America," said Emily, "a land of all the people again." She frowned a smile, cocky and teasing, and then she pointed at the waitress. "Weary heart. If that ain't goofy enough," she said, "we think we can start right here in Buffalo." The waitress groaned, rolling her eyes as silly city kids. Cracking gum, she muttered to herself. She didn't leave. "I've heard people talk about this, my neighbors and customers, right at these tables," she said, pointing here and there in the dining room. Then she took a deep breath and her face collapsed into what Emily knew must have been agonies. "I remember when everybody in Buffalo knew his place," the waitress said, and then her eyes wandered, searching for something. "But I remember when there was a place for everybody in Buffalo, too." Her mouth turned a funny way, and she stared long out the broad, plate glass window onto Main Street. "Jobs," the waitress mumbled. "It's like I could feel my husband's arms around me right now, and my baby on my shoulder." Emily had to put her hand over her mouth. "I used to have a house and a life," the waitress said. Then Emily felt her stare at two people whom she very likely saw as a spick and a nigger. And knowing what the next words signified, Emily almost cried out loud. The waitress asked, "Aren't you people too?" Her face contorted as a child's would. She was frightened and daring to, "What?" "Am I stupid?" the waitress asked, as if she were talking to the atmosphere. South Buffalo is tough. Winter is tough. Making ends meet in this town is tough. Then she stopped, and Emily looked at Richard, because his face had changed too, and he was speaking. "Am I out of my natural mind?" he asked, and Emily wondered if he knew that he had spoken out loud. Any sane nigger wouldn't even listen to this. I'm supposed to trust you two? I'm supposed to trust snobs in this downtown restaurant? Then he laughed. "I hate to give up the truth," he said. As if in reply, the waitress said as a child would, "Please don't lie to me." Emily saw her blink back tears. "Are you too serious?" the waitress asked. And once again this afternoon, Emily could barely breathe. She knew that her toe was at the door of the future. She dreaded turning that knob. Whatever her councilman was using her to do, she knew that now was the time. But she had learned never to invite the people inside the room of her mind who would slam the door on her the instant another pretty face flashed $1 more. The street came back at her because the rooms she knew were in tenements. She had to make a decision. Now. She had to decide right now. "Yes," said Emily, as solemnly as she would murmur in church. "Yes, we are." Richard arched his brow and stared at the table. Then he held out his hands, palms up, as if they might have been full of promise. After a long hesitation, reluctant and wary, he said, "Yeah, we are." The waitress stood in silence, as if she felt stupid, or felt an inexplicable excitement, having no idea what to say. A Catholic girl, Emily would hardly presume to know which ones were angels. "Have you blessed our conversation?" Emily asked. Richard ran a dark hand over his face and murmured, "Oh, man." "I'm Emily," said Latina, and she extended a hand. "Margie," said the waitress, accepting a handshake under a smile that wasn't sure about this exchange. But Emily held Margie's gaze and held Margie's hand, smiling, widening her eyes, and inviting Margie to relent, to believe, to join. And at length, Margie sighed. "I'm Margie Dugan," she mumbled, her voice cracking a little. "I used to be O'Malley," she cracked, as if recouping her pride. But then she acquiesced, gave it up for some reason that Emily couldn't have named under threat of harm, but that she knew was poignantly true. The Latina, hard city girl lost control for many tears. Richard exhaled a cautious breath and slowly closed his eyes, reaching a hand up to the clasped hands of the two women. Nobody let on right away, but Emily heard gossip later, saying that various clientele noticed Margie, overheard the chatter, and some people said that Emily's booth was brightly lit that day. Later, Emily would hear people opine that a movement was born in that booth, but she knew that was nonsense. The movement was born all over town on many days, in many places, but she heard stories later that some customers perceived a glow around an aging waitress who had dyed her hair purple of all things. The story had a sweet warmth, and along with that warmth, Emily saw the baby in the next booth clamp fat hands in his mouth. Precisely then, when she thought that Margie was struck dumb by hope after years of gloom. And Emily wondered if the baby felt something leery as joy that he surely couldn't comprehend and could barely express. Emily believed that the infant felt what she did, that the infant was sent to her in an everyday booth over iced tea. She believed that the sudden power of innocence that day transmogrified sordid adulthood. She internalized her conviction and held her faith out to the light in her mind. She internalized her conviction because she swore that she saw a profound metamorphosis happening, and the change was beautiful, reflecting everything that was beautiful to her. But then the baby's mommy picked him up and headed for the restroom, leaving the other woman alone in the booth for a minute. Emily figured the mom had to change the little guy. He had peed, or maybe he had dropped a happy load. Maybe the baby didn't count. Maybe the baby was coincidental, she thought later, and the glow over her booth was only gossip. On the day that Hope came to Buffalo in a diner on Main Street, who could ever tell? Coffee and tea, books for sale. Comments or questions? Coffee and tea, books for sale.
Great story.
I'm sorry?
It was a great story.
Thank you. I'm glad you liked it.
I'm very glad you said it in Buffalo.
In Buffalo.
And there are tons.
Well, thank you all. Thank you for coming.
I'm going to say that again.